Hey viewers! Hope you're all doing great. Before I start the story, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you enjoy my videos, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Do you hear it? That faint hum beneath the restless night, the sea brushing against ancient stone, the distant murmur of laughter in narrow alleys, the slow crackle of a candle struggling against the coastal wind. This is Naples, a kingdom that never truly slept. Even when the moon ruled the sky and the fishermen's boats rested like black silhouettes upon the Bay of Naples, life here, in this city of light and shadows, refused to be quiet. Somewhere a lute would sigh. Somewhere, the echo of a royal secret would turn over in its grave. And beneath it all, in the deep heart of the earth, Mount Vesuvius, the old volcano, would whisper in molten dreams. Naples under the moon was never just a city. It was a fever, a pulse that outlived empires. Tonight, let's walk through it, slowly, as if our footsteps could stir the ghosts of forgotten kings. Don't rush. Take a deep breath. The air smells of salt, of lemon groves, of something ancient, something that time forgot to bury. Our story begins around the 12th century, when Naples was still trembling between worlds. It had known the Greeks, who called it Neapolis, the new city. It had known the Romans, who built theaters and baths and roads that still slept beneath its cobbled veins. And yet, by the time the Normans arrived, those fierce men from the north with their stone hearts and sea-borne swords, Naples had already become a prize. The Normans took it, as all conquerors do, with ambition disguised as order. Under Roger II of Sicily, Naples became a jewel of the Mediterranean crown. But the jewel burned too bright. The city could never be tamed. Even in royal halls, whispers carried through. Whispers of loyalty and betrayal, of kingdoms bought and sold with marriages and murder. The moon over Naples saw it all. How Roger's heirs fought over the land. How the church tried to claim the crown. How the city's people, half fishermen, half poets, lived between splendor and ruin. It was a time when the nights were long, filled with flickering torches and the echo of prayers in Latin. Streets were narrow and uneven, their walls alive with moss and memory. Merchants from Amalfi and Palermo shouted prices in dialects that danced like music. Women leaned from balconies, throwing gossip into the air along with the scent of bread and olive oil. And above them, the castle of Capuano, solid and grim, the seat of Norman justice. They said, if you stood too close to its walls at night, you could hear the murmurs of prisoners whose crimes were merely being loyal to the wrong man. Naples was awake, always awake. But the real heart of its sleeplessness came not from the people, nor the crown, but from the mountain. Vesuvius loomed, silent yet alive, its black shape cutting into the moonlight like a warning from the gods. The people of Naples never forgot Pompeii. They carried that memory like a superstition. They never whistled toward the volcano, never mocked its silence. Children were told that if the mountain ever slept too long, it meant it was dreaming of fire again. And so, when the nights were calm, they still watched it. From their terraces, from the port, from the crowded taverns where sailors from every sea gathered to drink and sing. Vesuvius was their phantom king, untouchable, unanswerable, eternal. As centuries passed, new rulers came. The Hohenstaufens, the Angevins from France, each painting Naples with a new color of war and wealth. Charles I of Anjou brought French courts and foreign tongues, but the Neapolitans remained stubbornly themselves. They laughed at their kings, loved their city, and still stayed awake long after midnight, as if afraid that sleep would let the next conqueror sneak in. There is a strange beauty in cities that never sleep. They begin to breathe differently, to think in rhythm with the tide. Naples, by the 13th century, was one such creature. Half awake, half dreaming, lit by oil lamps and royal ambition. But if you walk quietly, imagine now, down the Via dei Tribunali, where stones glisten under the moon like wet bones, you might hear it still. The sound of hoofs, soft bell, the sigh of silk as a carriage passes. Inside, a noblewoman hides her face behind lace. Her husband is dead, poisoned perhaps, and the rumor says the king himself ordered it. No one dares speak too loudly. not even the priests. For in Naples, truth was dangerous, and the moon, though bright, revealed too much. The scent of jasmine fills the air as we step closer to the royal palace. Its marble gleams faintly in the pale blue light. Inside those walls, Charles of Anjou dreams of building a city that would rival Paris. Elegant, disciplined, loyal. But outside, Naples hums with defiance. Musicians play songs mocking the French tongue. Bakers sell bread shaped like crowns, only to step on them laughing when no guards are near. The kingdom was alive and restless. No one yet knew that soon the ground beneath their feet would tremble, not from the mountain, but from rebellion. For in this sleepless city, nothing remained silent for long. Listen, do you hear that sound again? That faint rumble beneath the stones. It isn't thunder. Something older. Something waking. The moon over Naples has begun to shift, and history once more turns in its sleep. The streets of Naples in the 14th century were a mosaic of contradictions. Golden palaces standing beside slums, velvet and rags brushing past each other in the same narrow lanes. Beneath the shadow of the Angevin dynasty, the city glittered with the wealth of trade and trembled with the tension of foreign rule. Charles II of Anjou had passed, leaving behind a legacy of ambition, and the throne had fallen to his granddaughter, Queen Joanna I of Naples. She was young, barely 16, and her beauty was spoken of in every corner of Europe. Yet beauty in Naples was always a dangerous gift. Joanna's rule began with promise, with grand processions through the city streets, gold-threaded banners fluttering in the wind, and bells ringing from the churches of Santa Chiara and San Lorenzo. The citizens cheered her as their own, for she had been born among them. They loved her courage, her wit, her refusal to bow to the heavy hands of the French courtiers who tried to control her. But peace in Naples never lasted long. Her marriage to Andrew of Hungary, a political bond arranged to unite the Angevin and Hungarian claims, became a slow tragedy. Andrew was awkward, foreign, and despised by the Neapolitan nobles. He wanted to be crowned king, but Joanna resisted, claiming the throne was hers by right. Their union turned to bitterness, and the palace filled with whispers of betrayal and conspiracy. One September night in 1345, the royal couple retreated to the summer palace at Aversa. The halls were lit by torches, and the air was heavy with perfume and tension. In the darkness before dawn, Andrew was seized by a group of masked men and strangled as he cried for help. His body was thrown from a window into the garden below. When morning came, the city woke to horror. The King of Hungary's brother was dead, murdered under the roof of his own wife. And though no one saw Joanna give the order, the suspicion fell upon her immediately. She was forced to flee Naples when Andrew's brother, King Louis of Hungary, invaded in vengeance. His soldiers stormed the gates, and blood ran through the streets of the once jubilant city. Churches burned, nobles were executed, and the people watched helplessly as their kingdom crumbled under the fury of foreign armies. Joanna escaped to Provence, to the city of Avignon, where the Pope still ruled from his distant palace. She defended herself before the pontiff, her voice steady, her crown slipping slightly upon her head as she swore her innocence. Whether she was guilty or not, history would never agree. Yet the Pope absolved her, and she returned to Naples, a queen scarred by scandal but unbroken. When she rode through the gates again, the people watched her with a strange reverence. Some saw her as cursed, others as the embodiment of their city, beautiful, wounded, defiant. Under her rule, Naples began to breathe again. She rebuilt what war had destroyed. Artists, scholars, and merchants found her court welcoming. The city's streets once again filled with music, trade, and the scent of wine from the taverns that overlooked the bay. But the shadow of vengeance never truly faded. Years later, her enemies returned. Charles of Durazzo, her cousin, came from Hungary with the backing of another pope. He claimed the throne as his own, accusing Joanna once more of regicide. The city divided again, loyalties shifting like tides. In 1382, Joanna was captured. She was confined in the fortress of San Feel, where in a small dim cell she met her end. They said she was strangled with a silk cord, the same fate her husband had met decades earlier. Thus the circle of death closed quietly around her reign. The people of Naples mourned her in silence. Even those who doubted her innocence could not deny her strength. She had ruled for nearly 40 years, a woman in a world of men, a queen who refused to kneel even when her own bloodline turned against her. Her death did not bring peace. The throne passed to Charles of Durazzo, then to Ladislas, and finally to Queen Joanna II, another monarch who would fight through deception and betrayal to hold the fragile crown of Naples. While kings and queens came and went, the city itself remained restless. The market squares still buzzed with arguments over prices and politics, the fishermen still cast their nets under the dim glow of lanterns, and Vesuvius still stood watch from a distance, unchanged, eternal. By the 15th century, Naples had become one of the most vibrant and contested cities in Europe. It was rich but unstable, learned but dangerous. Scholars studied in the shadow of soldiers. Artists painted frescoes while spies slipped through monasteries at night. The city was alive with contradictions, both sacred and profane. Then came Alfonso of Aragon. In 1442, after years of siege and struggle, Alfonso conquered Naples and ended the reign of the Angevins. His arrival was not just a change of power but the beginning of a new age. Alfonso was no ordinary conqueror. He was a patron of learning, a lover of books, and a man of vision. He ordered the construction of the Castel Nuovo, a fortress that would serve both as a palace and a symbol of strength. Its grand triumphal arch, sculpted with marble reliefs, celebrated his entry into the city. Inside, scholars from across Europe gathered to read the works of Aristotle and Livy. The court of Naples transformed into a center of the early Renaissance. Alfonso's rule brought light, but also discipline. He tried to impose order upon a city that resisted control by its very nature. Naples loved its chaos, its freedom, its unpredictability. Yet even as Alfonso reformed the courts and revived trade, the streets below continued to live their own life. Defiant, passionate, ungoverned. As his reign drew on, rumors began to spread. Of hidden tunnels beneath the royal palace, of treasure buried under the stones of the harbor, of secret meetings between the nobles and foreign merchants. The city thrived on stories. Truth and legend intertwined until they were impossible to separate. Naples was a city that thrived on the edge of ruin. Never quiet, never content, always moving toward something it could not name. By the late 15th century, Naples had grown into one of the largest cities in Europe, a glittering crown upon the Mediterranean, yet forever burdened by the weight of ambition. Under the Aragonese dynasty, the city flourished with art, architecture, and an uneasy peace. Alfonso of Aragon's successors continued his vision, but the peace he had carved out was fragile, like glass glimmering beneath a restless hand. When Alfonso died in 1458, the crown passed to his illegitimate son, Ferdinand I, known to history as Ferrante. His reign would become one of the most complicated and haunting chapters in Neapolitan history. He was a man of contrasts, intelligent, cultured, ruthless when he needed to be. He loved the arts and founded one of the first zoological gardens in Europe, where exotic animals were brought from distant lands to amuse the court. But beneath the splendor of Ferrante's Naples lay a pulse of fear. Ferrante was a king who understood betrayal intimately, for he lived surrounded by it. His own barons, the most powerful lords of southern Italy, plotted against him time and again. The so-called conspiracy of the barons in 1485 became one of the bloodiest episodes of his rule. The nobles, angered by heavy taxes and the king's iron grip, joined forces to overthrow him, calling on the Pope and the French for support. Ferrante struck back with cold precision. He invited the conspirators to his palace under the guise of reconciliation. The halls of Castel Nuovo were lit with candles, and music filled the air as the nobles entered, unaware that the feast would become their last. At the height of the celebration, Ferrante gave a signal. Guards burst into the chamber. The doors were sealed. The laughter turned to screams. Those who survived the massacre were imprisoned, their lands seized. Some were executed in the castle's underground chambers. Others were kept alive, or rather half alive, in the dungeons, where Ferrante was said to have preserved the bodies of his enemies in embalmed form. According to later chroniclers, he would sometimes visit these macabre trophies, standing silently before them as if speaking to ghosts. The rumor may have been exaggerated, but it reflected the truth of his reign. Naples under Ferrante was brilliant, cultured, and terrifying. And yet, even in its darkness, the city's spirit refused to die. The people continued to fill the markets and harbors, their lives bound more to trade than to court intrigues. The sea brought goods from the east, silks from Constantinople, spices from Alexandria, manuscripts from the Levant. Naples was the meeting point of civilizations, the crossroad between Europe and the East. Its architecture began to change, too. The Gothic lines of the Angevins softened into Renaissance harmony. The churches of Santa Maria la Nova and San Domenico Maggiore gleamed with frescoes and sculptures that celebrated human beauty as much as divine grace. Scholars gathered at the university to discuss Aristotle and astronomy, while poets like Jacopo Sannazaro wrote verses that turned the bay itself into myth, a sea of longing, a mirror of gods and mortals. But beyond the walls of learning and art, the world was shifting. In 1494, Charles VIII of France, young and ambitious, descended into Italy with a massive army. His goal was to claim Naples, which he considered his rightful inheritance through the Angevin line. The invasion was swift and merciless. Ferrante had died the previous year, leaving the throne to his son, Alfonso II. Alfonso was brave but deeply superstitious. He feared omens, and the approach of the French army drove him into despair. When the enemy crossed the Alps and began its march south, Alfonso abdicated in favor of his son, Ferdinand II, and fled the city in panic. Naples, left without a steady hand, fell almost without resistance. Charles VIII entered Naples in February 1495 to a spectacle of uneasy submission. Trumpets blared, the streets were strewn with flowers, and nobles came forward to offer allegiance to the new king. But beneath the ceremonies, resentment brewed. The French soldiers, young, wild, and arrogant, behaved like conquerors. They took over homes, plundered churches, and mocked the local customs. The people of Naples had seen many rulers, but this one was different. The French king was not interested in governing. He was intoxicated by his own triumph, yet his glory was brief. Within months, an alliance of Italian states formed to drive him out. The so-called League of Venice, including Spain, the Papal States, and Milan, united against the invader. As quickly as he had come, Charles was forced to retreat, leaving behind a broken city. Disease followed his army, a new plague that ravaged Naples and carried away thousands. The people buried their dead in mass graves and prayed that the next ruler, whoever he might be, would bring peace. When Ferdinand II returned to reclaim his throne, Naples was a ghost of itself, but alive. The people rebuilt as they always had. They patched the walls, reopened the markets, and filled the air once more with the sound of voices and haggling. Ferdinand ruled only a short while before his sudden death in 1496, followed by the accession of his uncle, Frederick. His reign would be the last of the Aragonese kings of Naples. In 1501, the city once again fell to foreign powers, this time to Spain through the cunning of Ferdinand of Aragon, the husband of Isabella of Castile. Naples, the sleepless kingdom, now belonged to an empire. The Spanish period that followed was both a blessing and a curse. It brought stability but also oppression. The viceroys who ruled in the name of Madrid governed with authority but little sympathy. Taxes grew heavier. The streets filled with soldiers, bureaucrats, and spies. Yet, paradoxically, this period also nurtured some of the city's greatest artistic and intellectual achievements. Caravaggio would later walk these streets, bringing light and shadow to canvas with the same intensity that Naples carried in its soul. The voices of scholars, dramatists, and musicians would rise again, defying silence. But for now, in the early 1500s, The city stood at the edge of transformation, no longer a kingdom of its own, yet still alive, still untamed. The sea remained restless, the mountain watched, and the moon shone as it always had, over palaces and prisons alike. And beneath it all, Naples waited. The 16th century dawned upon Naples with a quiet illusion of peace. The banners of Aragon had been replaced by those of Spain, and the city that once called itself a kingdom now bowed to the will of Madrid. Yet even under foreign rule, Naples remained restless. The Spanish viceroys governed from the grand palaces near Piazza del Plebiscito, their portraits painted in fine oils, their decrees written in cold Latin. But the soul of Naples belonged to no crown. The Spanish presence brought both splendor and suffocation. Wealth flowed in from across the Mediterranean, gold from the New World, silk from the East, the spices of distant coasts. The port of Naples became one of the busiest in Europe, a constant hum of merchants, sailors, and voices shouting in a dozen languages. Yet with this prosperity came inequality. The nobility grew fat with privilege, while the common people carried the burden of endless taxes. The viceroys ruled in the name of the Spanish kings, Ferdinand the Catholic, then Charles V, and later his son, Philip II. Under Charles, Naples became a vital part of the great Habsburg Empire. He fortified the city against the threat of Ottoman raids, constructing massive walls that hugged the coastline. Cannons faced the sea. Soldiers patrolled the harbor. From the towers of Castel Sant'Elmo, one could see the whole city like a living map. The crowded markets below, the smoke from bakeries rising like gray ribbons, the sails of ships stretching toward the horizon. The people of Naples adapted, as they always did. They traded, sang, and survived. In the narrow streets of Spaccanapoli, artisans carved saints out of wood and marble. In the cloisters of monasteries, scholars copied ancient texts, keeping alive the wisdom of Greece and Rome. The voices of the city mingled. Merchants haggling, children playing, the occasional cry of a priest calling for repentance. Yet beneath the rhythm of daily life, tension brewed. The Spanish administration drained the city's wealth to fund wars elsewhere. The poor starved while noble families feasted. Crime became common. The alleys after dark were dangerous. Knives flashed in the lamplight, and thieves vanished into the labyrinth of stairways and courtyards that seemed designed for secrets. The church grew powerful, perhaps more than the state itself. Naples became one of the centers of the Counter-Reformation, where inquisitors hunted heresy and confession became both a ritual and a weapon. In the churches, Baroque architecture rose like frozen thunder. Grand, heavy, gilded, and dramatic. Painters and sculptors transformed faith into spectacle. By mid-century, the influence of the Spanish crown reached every corner of life. The viceroy's court mirrored that of Madrid. Etiquette, hierarchy, and suspicion. But within the homes of the Neapolitans, life remained fiercely local. Families passed down stories older than Spain itself. Music drifted from courtyards, the early rhythms of what would one day become the Neapolitan song. Then came the shadow of war. In 1528, the French once again invaded southern Italy under King Francis I, hoping to wrest Naples from Spanish control. The siege was brutal. Disease and famine swept through the city as both armies fought not only each other but also hunger and plague. The citizens, trapped between two powers, turned to faith for survival. They prayed to Saint Januarius, San Gennaro, the city's patron saint, whose relics were believed to protect Naples from destruction. It was said that during those desperate days, when the French armies surrounded the walls and the dead lay unburied in the streets, the blood of San Gennaro, preserved in a small glass vial in the cathedral, miraculously liquefied. The people took it as a sign that the saint had not abandoned them. When the French finally withdrew, driven out by the Spanish, the miracle became part of Naples' living legend. From that moment on, the liquefaction of the saint's blood would be repeated 3 times a year, and even centuries later Neapolitans would watch it with trembling hearts, for they believed that if it ever failed to liquefy, disaster would follow. After the wars, Naples entered a new phase, a strange mixture of order and oppression. Spanish culture left deep marks on the city's music, architecture, and manners. The nobility spoke Castilian at court, while the people continued their native dialect in the streets. But no matter how heavy the Spanish rule grew, Naples remained defiantly itself. Loud, colorful, unpredictable. The 1560s and 1570s brought both prosperity and plague. The port thrived again as ships sailed to and from the Americas, bringing silver and slaves. Yet the narrow, crowded quarters of the city became breeding grounds for disease. When the plague struck in 1575, thousands perished. Priests carried crosses through the streets, urging repentance, while others fled. Those who survived rebuilt once again, resilient as stone. It was also in this period that Naples began to transform into one of the great centers of Baroque art. Under viceroys like Pedro de Toledo, the city expanded. Roads were widened, fortifications strengthened, and new churches rose in a style that blended Spanish grandeur with local emotion. The Gesù Nuovo, with its diamond-shaped facade, became a masterpiece of sacred architecture, its interior bursting with frescoes, gold, and shadow. Pedro de Toledo also imposed stricter laws: curfews, taxes, religious conformity. He tried to make Naples a model of order, but the people resisted. They were proud, quick to anger, and fiercely loyal to their traditions. Street fights between locals and Spanish soldiers were common. The city, though outwardly obedient, simmered with rebellion. In the taverns near the port, sailors from Genoa and Palermo spoke in hushed tones about uprisings in distant lands. In the homes of the poor, mothers sang lullabies that carried memories of older freedoms, of kings who had once spoken their language. By the end of the century, the uneasy balance began to crack. The heavy taxes demanded by the crown became unbearable. Grain prices soared. The nobles feasted behind guarded gates while the people starved. The moon still rose over the bay, but the city beneath it was no longer at peace. Something was changing in Naples. Something deep, inevitable. It was as if the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when centuries of silence and submission would finally break. The mountain still stood in the distance, quiet yet watchful. The sea still glittered under the night sky. But in the crowded streets of Spaccanapoli, men and women had begun to whisper again, not of saints this time, but of revolt. The 17th century opened over Naples with beauty and unease woven together, as if the city itself were a painting too vivid to be still. Its churches glimmered with gold, its palaces overflowed with art, and yet its people lived pressed together in misery. The Spanish viceroys continued to rule from their fortified palaces, distant from the cries of the markets below. Naples had become the second largest city in Europe after Paris, a restless metropolis of nearly 500,000 souls. Its harbor was crowded with ships from every sea, bringing pepper from India, silk from the East, and silver from the New World. But the city's wealth did not belong to its people. It flowed upward into the coffers of Spain and the hands of the nobility who lived behind carved doors and high windows. In the crowded quarters of the poor, hunger was a constant visitor. Families lived in single rooms, often in basements or attics, their walls damp from the sea air. The air was filled with the noise of children, the clang of hammers, the sharp calls of vendors. From dawn to night, Naples worked, but its laborers saw little reward. By 1647, the strain could no longer hold. The price of bread rose sharply due to new taxes imposed by the Spanish crown. Grain ships were delayed, and rumors spread that the government was hoarding food. The tension that had simmered for generations erupted into open rebellion. It began in the market near Piazza del Mercato, where a young fisherman named Tommaso Aniello, known simply as Masaniello, became the voice of the people. He was not a noble or a soldier, only a man of the city, fiery, clever, and unafraid. Standing upon an overturned cart, he shouted to the crowd that Naples had suffered long enough. His words caught fire in the air. Within hours, the markets turned into battlegrounds. Thousands joined him. Fishermen, workers, beggars, armed with sticks, knives, and sheer desperation. They stormed the tax offices, burned the records, and drove out the hated officials. The uprising spread through the city like a storm. For 9 days, Naples belonged not to Spain, but to its people. The palaces of the rich trembled. Even the viceroy, the Duke of Arcos, was forced to negotiate. Masaniello met him in the grand hall of Castelnuovo, the fisherman standing barefoot before the polished marble of empire. The two men spoke, and for a brief moment, justice seemed possible. But power in Naples was a fragile thing. The rebellion, born from hunger and hope, began to fracture. Masaniello, once the hero of the streets, grew paranoid and erratic, overwhelmed by sudden fame and pressure. His own followers turned against him. On the 10th day, he was murdered in the very square where his revolt had begun. His body was dragged through the streets, a warning from those who had never intended to lose control. And yet the people mourned him. A week later, they carried his body through the city in a solemn procession. Even the priests blessed his name. To them, Masaniello had been more than a man. He was the spirit of Naples itself, wild and unbroken, forever rebelling against chains. After his death, the Spanish quickly restored order. The rebellion was crushed, and its leaders executed. But something had changed in the soul of the city. The people had seen their own strength, and though silence returned, it was a silence that remembered. In the decades that followed, Naples continued to grow. The Spanish viceroys rebuilt the city with a kind of theatrical grandeur. New streets were laid out, and Baroque architecture flourished. The churches of San Gregorio Armeno and San Carlo all'Arena rose in sweeping curves of marble and light. Inside, angels and saints seemed to float above the altars, suspended between heaven and earth. Art became Naples' most visible form of resistance, a way to survive beauty amid control. The great painter Caravaggio, fleeing Rome after killing a man, found refuge here in the early 1600s. His years in Naples were dark but productive. He painted the poor, the desperate, and the holy with the same fierce realism. His canvases, lit by sharp contrasts of light and shadow, seemed to hold the city's soul, half divine, half condemned. After Caravaggio came his followers, artists like Giuseppe de Ribera and Luca Giordano, who filled Naples with scenes of martyrdom and miracles. Their work mirrored the contradictions of the city: violence and beauty, faith and suffering intertwined. But behind the brilliance of its art, Naples was decaying under the weight of Spanish neglect. Epidemics struck again. In 1656, a terrible plague swept through the city, killing more than half of its population. The streets fell silent as bodies filled the churches and squares. Families vanished overnight. Entire neighborhoods became graveyards. When the plague finally subsided, those who survived rebuilt once again, not out of hope but necessity. Life in Naples always moved forward, as if forgetting was the only way to endure. By the end of the 17th century, Spain's power over Europe was weakening. Its wars drained its treasury, and its colonies began to slip away. In Naples, whispers grew louder. Perhaps the city's sleeplessness would soon bring another dawn. Meanwhile, under the Spanish crown, science and thought began to stir in Naples universities. Philosophers debated Galileo's discoveries, often in secret. Physicians studied anatomy, seeking to understand the mysteries of disease that had so often ravaged their city. The old boundaries between faith and knowledge began to blur. The nobles continued their masquerades, the church held its grand processions, and the poor filled the taverns with song. Yet something invisible was shifting, an impatience, a yearning for something beyond obedience. The 18th century was approaching, and with it, the promise of change. The city that had survived kingdoms, volcanoes, and plagues would soon awaken again, not with fire or rebellion, but with ideas. The moon rose over the Bay of Naples as it always had, its reflection trembling on the waves. The city's bells marked another midnight. The volcano stood quiet in the distance, though its heart still glowed beneath the earth. Naples, still awake, waited for history to move once more. The Bourbon dynasty had brought stability to Naples, but not peace of spirit. The people were restless, the nobles ambitious, and the artists, forever torn between loyalty and rebellion. In the narrow alleys near Piazza del Mercato, whispers grew louder. Stories of secret societies, of men gathering in candlelit rooms, reading the forbidden texts of liberty and equality. It was the late 18th century, the time when revolutions echoed across Europe like thunder from afar, reaching even the sleeping courtyards of Naples. King Ferdinand IV, son of Charles III, was a man torn between pleasure and paranoia. He ruled with the spirit of a hunter more than that of a monarch, impulsive, fond of laughter, yet fearful of ideas. His wife, Queen Maria Carolina, was the true mind behind the throne. Intelligent, proud, and politically sharp, she had been the sister of Marie Antoinette of France. And when her sister's head fell to the guillotine in Paris, something inside her hardened. She turned Naples into a fortress of control, suppressing dissent and silencing voices that dared to echo the winds of France. Yet no power could stop the undercurrent of change. Naples, the kingdom that never slept, listened. In taverns and theaters, poets disguised revolution in songs, and sailors carried pamphlets beneath the decks of their ships. Mount Vesuvius, looming in the distance, seemed to glow redder each night, a silent reminder that fire could rise from the depths at any time. Then came 1799, the year when sleep truly left the kingdom. French troops entered Naples, welcomed by a segment of the populace that dreamt of freedom. The old monarchy fled to Sicily, and in their place was born the short-lived Parthenopean Republic. For a few fleeting months, Naples became a laboratory of ideals. Streets were renamed, laws rewritten, and the walls painted with mottos of liberty. But the Republic was fragile. It was a dream carried by poets more than by soldiers. The Bourbon loyalists, with the support of the British Navy and the cruel will of Cardinal Ruffo, returned with vengeance. The Republic fell, its leaders executed in public squares. Eleonora Pimentel de Fonseca, a noblewoman and poet who had edited revolutionary papers, was hanged in Piazza Mercato. Her words, "I was born free and will die free," drifted like ash through the air. Naples wept in silence. The kingdom had reawakened, but not to light, rather to the dim glow of tyranny and loss. In the following decades, Naples became a paradox. By day, it shone with elegance and art. The palaces of Capodimonte, the opera at San Carlo, the scholars in their salons debating the language of Virgil. By night, the streets belonged to hunger and despair. Fishermen sang to the sea for luck, thieves prayed to forgotten saints, and the smell of burning olive oil mixed with that of candle wax in the darkened homes of the poor. But there was something eternal about Naples, an energy that refused to die. Even under the weight of monarchy and oppression, the people laughed. They cooked with joy, loved passionately, and celebrated festivals as if mocking fate itself. The city's heart beat in rhythm with the waves against the bay, sometimes calm, sometimes furious, but always alive. Vesuvius, however, was never still. In 1822 and again in 1834, it erupted, casting ash over rooftops and vineyards. People gathered on balconies to watch the glowing river of lava slide down the mountain. Some prayed, some cursed, and some simply stood in awe, as if watching the hand of God write upon the earth. The volcano had become Naples's oldest storyteller, destroying, then reminding, then sleeping once again. Then came a new dawn, faint but insistent, the call for Italian unification. Across the peninsula, from the northern plains of Lombardy to the southern shores of Sicily, voices cried for one nation, one Italy. Naples, though proud of its individuality, could not remain untouched. Garibaldi's red shirts marched south, carrying both the sword and the dream of unity. When they arrived at Naples in 1860, the people filled the streets, cheering as King Francis II, the last Bourbon ruler, fled. For the first time in centuries, Naples belonged to a new kingdom, the Kingdom of Italy. The bells rang across the bay, and fireworks lit the sky. But beneath the celebration lingered unease. The city had changed hands so many times, from Greeks to Romans, Normans to Bourbons, and now to a distant government in Turin. Would this unity heal Naples, or would it merely change its crown? In the years that followed, prosperity did not come easily. Naples was treated as a provincial jewel, admired for its beauty but neglected for its needs. Poverty deepened. The grandeur of its past became a weight rather than a pride. And yet, the soul of the city persisted, restless, bright, and defiant. Travelers from the north, writers, painters, musicians, came to Naples and found themselves spellbound. They described the city as both heaven and hell, its sunsets unmatched, its slums unbearable, its people radiant with contradiction. The English poet Shelley called it a paradise inhabited by devils. But perhaps he misunderstood. The Neapolitans were not devils. They were survivors of history, dancing in the ruins of every fallen crown. The harbor glittered at night, the same as it had for 1,000 years. The moonlight lay across the water like silver silk, and beyond it, Vesuvius exhaled faint smoke into the stars. The city did not sleep, it never had. It dreamed with open eyes, haunted and beautiful, waiting for its next awakening. Would it come from art or revolution, or perhaps from within its own restless heart? No one knew. Naples under the moon was always half in light, half in shadow, a kingdom between dreams and reality. The unification of Italy brought with it promises that Naples waited to see fulfilled. Yet what followed was not the glory of rebirth but the slow ache of disillusion. The northern rulers, seated in Turin and later in Rome, saw the south as a conquered land rather than an equal partner. Factories closed, taxes rose, and the gulf between north and south deepened into a wound that still breathes today. The proud capital of a kingdom became, overnight, a provincial city. Its palaces remained, its bay glittered as before, but the pulse of power had shifted elsewhere. The nobility who once entertained kings now found themselves relics of a vanished order. Their halls echoed with memories rather than laughter. Servants dismissed, chandeliers unlit, portraits of Bourbon kings gathering dust beneath cracked ceilings. But Naples refused silence. The streets hummed with life, even in hardship. Market women argued over fish prices. Street musicians strummed guitars beneath weathered balconies, and the air, thick with sea salt and smoke, carried voices that would not surrender. The people learned to live between nostalgia and necessity. They were too poor to dream of grandeur, too proud to forget it. In the shadow of Vesuvius, entire neighborhoods sprang up, chaotic, colorful, alive. The working class found strength in numbers, turning survival into culture. Out of hunger came humor, out of despair, songs. O Sol Mio, Funiculi Funicula, melodies that would one day circle the world, were born not in palaces, but in narrow streets where life burned brightest. Yet beneath the music, Naples trembled again. The volcano erupted in 1872, darkening skies for days. Ash rained over vineyards, covering lemons and olives in gray. But even then, people refused to leave. They swept their roofs, lit candles, and went back to their markets. It's just Vesuvius dreaming, they said, as though the mountain were part of the family. Unpredictable but beloved. Meanwhile, the 19th century rolled on. Europe modernized. Railways carved through mountains. Telegraph lines buzzed with new voices. And cities reinvented themselves. Naples tried to keep up. A grand new promenade was built along the sea, Via Caracciolo, where elegant women in parasols and men in waistcoats strolled beneath the palms. The opera house, San Carlo, continued to dazzle, hosting the greatest tenors and sopranos of the age. And yet, behind that brilliance, the old city decayed. The poor lived in overcrowded tenements, bassi, rooms barely larger than a cell. Disease spread easily, and the gulf between classes grew wider. Foreign visitors, enchanted by Naples's beauty, were often shocked by its poverty. How can a city so full of sunlight have so much shadow? They asked. But Naples was used to contradiction. It had lived on that balance for centuries. Then came the 20th century, the age of machines, wars, and uncertainty. The First World War touched Naples lightly at first, though its sons were sent north to fight battles they scarcely understood. Many never returned. When they did, they found a city both familiar and changed. Modernity had crept in. Trams rattled through the streets, electric lights flickered in cafes, and cinema houses began to appear where once there had been small theaters. But the scars of war lingered. Unemployment rose. Political tension grew. In the 1920s, a new figure rose to power in Italy: Benito Mussolini. His fascist regime promised discipline, order, and renewal. Naples, weary of chaos, listened. Fascist banners hung from municipal buildings, and speeches filled the squares. Yet the promises again proved hollow. The poor remained poor. The rich adapted as they always had. The volcano slept, but the city beneath it smoldered with quiet unease. By the 1930s, Naples had become a paradox once again, a showcase of Italian grandeur and a mirror of its failures. Mussolini visited often, parading through the streets lined with flags, declaring that Naples would be the jewel of the Mediterranean. Buildings were torn down, new boulevards built, and the old neighborhoods reshaped to fit the fascist dream. But beneath the marble facades, hunger persisted. And then came the thunder of 1940, the Second World War. Naples, with its great port and strategic position, became one of the most bombed cities in Europe. The nights were no longer filled with music, but with the whine of sirens and the crash of explosions. Families huddled in basements as the sky burned. The harbor, once glittering with trade and laughter, was reduced to rubble. In 1943, when the Allies landed in southern Italy, Naples rose in rebellion before they arrived. Civilians, weary of occupation and starvation, fought against the German forces in what became known as the 4 Days of Naples. It was not an army but a people's uprising. Shopkeepers, students, mothers, even children, fighting to reclaim their city. By the time the Allies entered, the Germans had already been driven out by the Neapolitans themselves. It was a victory of the spirit, fierce, desperate, and profoundly human. Yet the price was immense. The city lay in ruins. Streets where music once echoed were silent except for the sound of rebuilding. Naples had survived yet another empire, another fire, another grief. It was no longer a royal capital, but something perhaps greater, a testament to endurance. In the post-war years, poverty deepened, but so did resilience. Families returned to rebuild from the ashes. Fishermen went back to the sea. Artists painted the ruins in golden light, and the laughter slowly returned. Vesuvius, too, stirred, erupting again in 1944, as though marking the end of an era with one last reminder of nature's power. And still Naples refused to sleep. Through rubble and renewal, through hunger and hope, the city glowed, a living contradiction, a restless soul beneath the moon. The nights grew quieter in the 1950s, yet they carried the same hum of energy. Neon lights reflected on the wet cobblestones, and American jazz mixed with Italian folk songs in the air. The new world had arrived, but Naples, as always, kept its ancient heart beating beneath the modern rhythm. The 1950s brought an uneasy calm to Naples, the kind that comes not from peace, but from exhaustion. The war was over, the rubble mostly cleared, yet the memories of bombed streets and broken families lingered like ghosts at every corner. Italy was rebuilding, and Naples too tried to reinvent itself. But this city, old as myth, never changed easily. In the glow of post-war optimism, promises once again filled the air. The Marshall Plan brought aid, factories reopened, and film studios in Rome began to cast their eyes south. Yet Naples remained both enchanted and cursed, too beautiful to be forgotten, too complex to be fixed. Its people carried centuries of survival in their blood. They did not expect miracles. They expected struggle, and in that struggle they found rhythm. In the alleys of Spaccanapoli, children played football with rags, their laughter bouncing off ancient walls. Women leaned from balconies gossiping in Neapolitan dialect, the sound rising like a song that had no beginning and no end. Men gathered at the harbor, staring out at the bay, dreaming of jobs in America, Argentina, or Australia. Migration became the new exodus. Those who left carried photographs of the volcano, of mothers and saints. Those who stayed clung to the old rhythms of survival: food, faith, and laughter. Cinema found Naples again. The camera loved its contradictions. The sunlight on cracked stone, the tears and humor mingled in the same face. Directors like Vittorio De Sica and Roberto Rossellini came to capture the city's truth. In films like Loro di Napoli, 1954, the people of Naples were shown as they were: flawed, fiery, unbreakable. Sophia Loren, a daughter of the city, rose from its poverty to become an icon, her beauty carrying the defiance of an entire generation. The 1960s were a decade of change and disillusion. Italy's economy boomed in the north. Milan and Turin thrived, but Naples lagged behind. The promises of unification seemed distant once again. In the shadow of new factories, the old wounds of inequality deepened. The narrow streets filled with life but not with opportunity. Youths, restless and ambitious, sought escape. Some joined the police or military. Others joined the rising underworld. The Camorra, Naples's ancient and elusive criminal organization, returned to prominence. Its roots stretched back to the Bourbon era, when poverty and oppression had birthed secret societies of survival. Now, in the modern age, it adapted, trading in cigarettes, drugs, and later in politics itself. Its code was silence, its reach long. For many, it was both a curse and a cruel form of order in a city where the government often seemed absent. Yet Naples was never just crime and chaos. It remained a capital of creativity. Musicians reinvented traditional songs with electric guitars. Painters turned ruins into art. Writers like Elena Ferrante, years later, would give voice to the city's raw, feminine anger and beauty. Naples was never content to be seen only through tragedy. It demanded to be felt, to be understood, to be remembered. The 1970s came with their own storms. Italy trembled under political unrest, the years of lead, when bombings and kidnappings darkened the nation. In Naples, fear was layered atop poverty. Yet the city kept its rituals. The festivals, the sea processions, the laughter that could break through any silence. The church remained central, but so did superstition. Amulets against the evil eye hung in doorways. Saints shared shrines with ancient pagan symbols. The past never left Naples. It merely changed its mask. Then, in 1980, the earth itself betrayed the people. The Irpinia earthquake struck near Naples, destroying villages and shaking the city to its bones. Thousands died, and many more were left homeless. Buildings that had stood since the Bourbons crumbled into dust. The government's slow response deepened public anger, and corruption infected the reconstruction efforts. Yet once again, Naples rebuilt itself, with hands blistered, hearts wounded, but spirits unbroken. After the quake came another wave of migration. Entire families left the crumbling tenements for the northern cities or abroad. Those who stayed behind found a city that oscillated between beauty and despair. Yet there was always light, even in the darkest corners. The laughter of a child in a narrow alley, the smell of fresh espresso in the morning, the glow of the volcano at night. These were the small certainties that bound Naples to life. In the 1990s, the city began to rediscover its pride. Restoration projects cleaned centuries of soot from ancient buildings. Tourists returned, drawn by the myth of Naples, by Pompeii's frozen tragedy, by Capri's shimmering sea, by Vesuvius's silent presence. But even then, the line between history and myth blurred. Naples was not a museum. It was a living paradox. The people of Naples began to turn their hardships into art once again. Graffiti appeared on old stone walls, not as vandalism but as testimony. Poets performed in marketplaces. Rappers from Scampia told stories of lost youth and resilience. It was as if every generation of Neapolitans had inherited not just a city, but a responsibility. To speak, to sing, to survive. The volcano watched as it always had. Silent, patient, eternal. It had seen empires rise and fall, had buried cities and spared others. To the people of Naples, Vesuvius was no longer a threat. It was a reminder that life was fragile, that everything could end in a single night. And because of that, life was to be lived loudly, passionately, without fear. And so, even in the 21st century, as skyscrapers rose in other cities and the digital world began to erase the boundaries of time and place, Naples remained uniquely awake. It was a kingdom without a crown, ruled not by kings but by memory, a kingdom that refused sleep because its dreams were too vivid to rest. The moon still rose over the bay each night, lighting the old domes and the new lights. The fishermen still mended their nets by lantern glow. Lovers still walked along via Toledo, whispering promises they might never keep. And somewhere in the shadow of Vesuvius, the city kept breathing, slow, uneven, eternal. It was Naples under the moon. Restless, beautiful, haunted, alive. The 21st century opened over Naples like a hesitant dawn, uncertain, gray at the edges, yet glowing softly over the bay. The city had survived another century of storms, and now it stood at the threshold of a new age. The air was no longer filled with the rumble of carriages or the songs of sailors, but with the hum of scooters, the echo of mobile phones, and the laughter of students walking home beneath the same ancient domes that had seen 1,000 years pass. The port of Naples, once the gate of empires, became a crossroads of modern commerce and migration. Ferries came and went towards Sicily, Sardinia, and North Africa. Cruise ships anchored where Spanish galleons had once stood. The water shimmered with reflections of steel and neon. Yet beneath the surface, the old sea still spoke. Fishermen said they could feel the heartbeat of the city through the tides, a rhythm as old as time itself. In the narrow streets, life continued to move with its own tempo. Slow, chaotic, human. Street vendors sold sfogliatelle and fried pizza. Children chased stray cats through courtyards filled with the smell of basil and soap. Old women, with hands wrinkled like parchment, sat by open doors, gossiping as they peeled lemons. Time did not flow in Naples, it circled. Every morning felt like a return to something ancient, something that refused to die. But Naples was changing. A new generation rose. Young, educated, impatient. They loved their city fiercely, yet they demanded more. They were tired of seeing its beauty wasted, its talent drained by corruption, its reputation stained by the shadow of the Camorra. Protests filled the streets again, not for kings or empires this time, but for dignity. The people had learned, through centuries of endurance, that silence was never safety. The city council began to restore the old quarters, Spacanapoli, Quartieri Spagnoli, the grand piazzas once blackened by soot. Ancient churches were cleaned. Hidden frescoes saw daylight for the first time in centuries. The Teatro San Carlo reopened with new brilliance, its chandeliers blazing as they had under the Bourbons. Tourists once again filled the city, drawn by its contradictions, a place of saints and sinners, chaos and grace. And yet, beneath the surface, the struggle remained. Poverty did not vanish. It simply changed its face. The Camorra still lingered in the shadows, adapting to modern trade, its influence now hidden in construction deals and politics rather than street corners. But the people of Naples had learned how to resist not through violence, but through life itself. By living fully, they defied the darkness. The early 2000s saw Naples emerge as a cultural voice again. Its filmmakers and musicians spoke not of fantasy, but of truth. Raw, unpolished, and deeply human. Films like Gomorrah revealed the brutal underworld with a realism that stunned the world, while others celebrated the laughter, beauty, and resilience that defined Neapolitan life. The city became both muse and mirror, reflecting the best and worst of humanity. And then, nature once again reminded everyone of its presence. Vesuvius, long silent, began to whisper. Small tremors shook the ground in 2004, 2007, and again in later years. Scientists warned of the inevitable, that one day the mountain would awaken again. But Neapolitans, with their usual mixture of fatalism and faith, shrugged. If it happens, they said, it will happen. We have lived with fire before. And so they carried on, as their ancestors had done for 3 millennia. Baking bread in the shadow of the volcano, celebrating weddings, arguing over football, and greeting the sea every morning as though it were a living friend. Naples's football club, SSC Napoli, became a new form of religion. When Diego Maradona played for the city in the 1980s, he had become not just a hero but a saint. His murals still adorned walls decades later, painted in blues and golds. After his passing in 2020, the city mourned as if it had lost one of its own kings. Candles burned beneath his images. Songs were sung in his name. For many, Maradona was the embodiment of Naples itself. Flawed, brilliant, defiant, and unforgettable. The city also began to turn toward its forgotten past. Archaeologists worked tirelessly in Pompeii and Herculaneum, uncovering more secrets buried under the ash of Vesuvius. Each new fresco, each mosaic, seemed to whisper a truth long hidden, that beauty and destruction had always walked hand in hand here. Tourists came in millions, yet few understood that beneath their feet lay not just ruins, but memory, the ghosts of laughter, of dinners interrupted, of lives frozen by fire. In the heart of Naples, the rhythm of the streets never slowed. Markets buzzed with energy, churches filled with light, and even at midnight, one could hear music. Guitars, laughter, sometimes the distant toll of a bell. It was as if the city itself refused to rest. Every wall told a story. Every alleyway hid a century. The stones of Naples had absorbed time, and now they breathed it back, softly, endlessly. Yet for all its chaos and contradictions, Naples had something no other city could claim. Soul. A soul that belonged to no era, no ruler, no empire. It was carved from fire, shaped by sea winds, and tempered by centuries of survival. That soul had outlived the Bourbons, the French, the fascists, the bombs, and the earthquakes. It pulsed still, under the moon, under the hum of electric lights, under the endless sky that had seen it all. And when the night deepened, and the moon rose high over the bay, its silver path stretched from the shore to the volcano's crown. The water shimmered like a mirror of history, one that reflected not perfection, but persistence. The city below did not sleep. Never had. In those quiet hours, when even the traffic slowed and the harbor stilled, one could almost feel the centuries layered upon each other. Greek laughter, Roman chants, Spanish prayers, Bourbon footsteps, and the whispers of those who had lived, loved, and died beneath the same indifferent moon. Naples, the kingdom that never slept, had learned something few others had. That time could wound, destroy, and rebuild, but it could never erase the heart that kept beating beneath the ruins. The moonlight traced the outlines of old rooftops, of crumbling towers and newly painted balconies. Somewhere, a woman's voice rose in song from an open window, carrying a tune older than memory itself. And as the sound drifted through the air, the whole city seemed to pause, as though listening to its own past breathing softly in the dark. As the 15th century dawned, Naples stood at a crossroad between destruction and rebirth. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense and gunpowder. The cathedrals echoed with prayers while soldiers marched through the cobbled streets, their armor clinking like distant thunder. The kingdom had become a theater of shifting loyalties, where crowns changed hands faster than coins, and alliances were sealed not with honor but with necessity. In 1442, Alfonso V of Aragon entered Naples after years of siege and cunning diplomacy. He was not a man of fleeting ambition. He dreamed of a Mediterranean empire, of a city that would rival Florence in beauty and Venice in power. The people of Naples, weary of conflict yet hungry for grandeur, welcomed him as Alfonso the Magnanimous. Under his rule, art and architecture blossomed once again. He ordered the renovation of Castel Nuovo, its triumphal arch carved with scenes of conquest, as if the stone itself remembered the wars that had earned him this throne. The royal court glittered with poets, scholars, and explorers. Libraries were filled with Greek manuscripts rescued from Byzantium, and the murmur of Latin philosophy mixed with the hum of street vendors outside. The city's scholars debated under frescoed ceilings while, just beyond the palace, fishermen cast their nets into the dark water of the bay, their small boats illuminated by the moon that seemed to linger longer over Naples than anywhere else. But beneath this golden facade, a more complex truth simmered. Alfonso's rule brought prosperity, yes, but also the heavy hand of control. The poor remained poor, and whispers of discontent moved through the alleyways like smoke. The nobles feasted on imported wines, while the peasants struggled with the taxes that paid for the marble fountains and foreign artists. Still, the people found a strange pride in their suffering, a belief that Naples, with its chaos and contradictions, was unlike any other city in Italy. After Alfonso's death, the kingdom fractured once more. His illegitimate son Ferdinand I took the throne, strong-willed, paranoid, and determined to hold power at any cost. He fortified the city, built secret tunnels beneath the castles, and filled his court with spies. Yet, even as fear spread through his realm, Naples pulsed with a dangerous vitality. The Church of San Domenico Maggiore became a meeting place for thinkers who questioned divine order. The underground catacombs beneath the city became burial grounds for both saints and traitors. The volcano loomed above all, sometimes silent, sometimes roaring, as if it too had a say in who would rule this restless land. By the time the Italian wars erupted, Naples had become a jewel too bright to ignore. France claimed it, Spain contested it, and Italy itself fractured under their boots. The city endured siege after siege, from Charles VIII's cannon fire to the Spanish galleys that filled the harbor. The people hid their treasures beneath their floors, their prayers blending with the rumble of distant artillery. Yet, miraculously, the soul of Naples refused to die. Musicians played on street corners even as the foreign troops marched by. Bakers still rose before dawn to knead their dough. Children watched the glow of Mount Vesuvius from the rooftops, imagining dragons instead of disaster. The spirit of survival had become Naples' inheritance, a legacy carved not in marble, but in memory. Every invasion left scars but also stories. The French brought their art, the Spaniards their discipline, and each ruler left behind fragments that fused into something distinct, something that was neither wholly European nor purely Mediterranean. And so, as night fell over the city once again, the lights of Naples glimmered across the bay. Fishermen's lamps flickered like stars reflected on water, and from the hilltop, the royal palaces shone pale against the darkness. Somewhere in those shadows, beneath the echo of church bells and waves, a sense of timelessness lingered, as if Naples herself, battered but unbroken, had decided that she would never truly sleep. When the Spanish crown tightened its grip on Naples in the early 16th century, the city entered a long season of obedience, gilded but heavy. The streets that once danced with laughter and song now echoed with the clicking of Spanish boots and the murmurs of bureaucrats. The Aragonese banners were lowered, and in their place flew the insignia of Habsburg Spain, austere, unyielding, and foreign. Yet, even in this subjugation, Naples retained her pulse. The Spaniards ruled through their viceroys, men who sat in marble halls and watched the city from above, but they could never quite tame the Neapolitan spirit. Beneath the surface, resistance brewed not in battlefields, but in art, in satire, and in superstition. Plays mocked the rulers in secret, and songs hummed in taverns told stories of the city's lost kings and defiant hearts. The population swelled. By the 17th century, Naples was one of the largest cities in Europe. A maze of narrow streets, crowded markets, and palaces pressed close to poverty. The contrasts were staggering. Silk merchants walked past beggars who slept beneath broken statues. The smell of roast chestnuts mixed with sewage and perfume. Above all this, Mount Vesuvius loomed, quiet for now but always watching. In 1631 the silence broke. The volcano erupted with such fury that night turned to day and the sea boiled against the harbor. Ash rained on the city, coating its rooftops in a layer of ghostly white. The bells of every church rang as priests carried relics through the streets, begging divine mercy. Thousands fled toward the hills. Others stayed behind, convinced that faith would protect them. When the sky finally cleared, Naples was blackened and shaken, yet alive. The survivors rebuilt, as they always did, their prayers now mixed with awe and defiance. It was in these turbulent decades that a new kind of Neapolitan identity emerged, proud, fatalistic, and strangely joyous. The streets became stages for commedia dell'arte, where masked performers mimicked both nobles and peasants with sharp wit. The figure of Pulcinella was born, half clown, half philosopher, forever laughing at authority, forever surviving through humor. He became Naples itself, poor, clever, unbreakable. Under Spanish rule, art and music found strange freedom amid oppression. The Neapolitan school of music flourished, giving birth to composers whose melodies echoed far beyond Italy. Baroque churches rose, their interiors glimmering with gold leaf and marble angels. Yet outside their doors, famine and plague stalked the poor. The city oscillated between splendor and suffering, like a candle flickering in the wind. In 1647, the spark of rebellion finally ignited. Masaniello, a fisherman with salt in his hair and fury in his heart, led the people of Naples in revolt against the Spanish taxes. For 10 days he ruled the city, barefoot, armed with nothing but charisma and conviction. The poor crowned him their leader. The nobles watched in horror as the balance of power slipped. But revolutions burn fast. Masaniello was betrayed and murdered, his body thrown into the streets. For a moment, it seemed his rebellion had died with him, but his name lingered, whispered in alleys and taverns as a symbol of courage against tyranny. After the uprising, Spanish control grew harsher. The viceroys tightened their grip, and the Inquisition cast long shadows. Still, Naples remained restless, never entirely subdued. Even as foreign soldiers patrolled the streets, love songs drifted from balconies, and painters captured the city's light with impossible tenderness. In the quiet hours of night, when the city seemed to sleep, the bay would reflect the moonlight like liquid silver. Ships came and went, from Spain, from Africa, from the New World, carrying goods, secrets, and diseases. Naples had become a crossroads of empire, a city both coveted and cursed. And beneath it all, the volcano slumbered again, as if waiting for the next tremor, the next rebellion, the next story that would rise from its ashes. Naples endured, her streets cracked and her spirit luminous, a city always trembling between faith and fire. And those who lived there, the poor, the poets, the dreamers, had begun to believe that perhaps their city's sleeplessness was not a curse, but a destiny. The dawn of the 18th century arrived over Naples with a deceptive calm, the kind of quiet that hides beneath the surface of deep water. Spain's hold had loosened, and in its place came the Austrians, then once again the Bourbons. Naples had become a prize in Europe's endless games of succession, changing masters as easily as tides changed direction in the bay. But through all of it, the city refused to lose itself. When Charles of Bourbon took the throne in 1734, he found a city weary but unbroken. He understood that to rule Naples was to court its contradictions, to embrace both its beauty and its chaos. Instead of crushing its spirit, he sought to harness it. Under his reign, Naples transformed. The royal palace of Caserta rose like a dream from the plains, a vision of marble, fountains, and endless corridors meant to rival Versailles. Its gardens stretched toward the horizon, where the volcano's shadow lay like a sleeping god. Inside the city, the Teatro di San Carlo opened its doors, the grandest opera house in Europe. Its chandeliers reflected in the eyes of nobles and merchants alike, and its stage echoed with arias that seemed to dissolve the boundary between sorrow and splendor. Music had always been Naples' hidden language, and now it spoke louder than ever. Composers like Pergolesi and Cimarosa wrote melodies that carried the city's laughter and grief to foreign courts. But as the light of culture grew brighter, the shadows deepened too. The Bourbon court shimmered with luxury, yet the people in the alleys still lived by candlelight. While philosophers debated reason and progress, the poor prayed to saints for bread. Naples, ever divided, mirrored the world's awakening, torn between faith and intellect, between submission and freedom. The Enlightenment crept into the city not through proclamations but through whispers. Secret salons gathered behind shuttered windows where writers and thinkers discussed forbidden ideas: liberty, equality, the nature of kings. The Accademia degli Incurabili treated the sick, while scholars studied anatomy, blending science with compassion. Even as superstition clung to the streets, knowledge began to pierce the fog of fear. In 1767, the Jesuits were expelled from Naples, a gesture of reform that rippled through the city's intellectual circles. Libraries opened, scientific instruments appeared in the hands of the curious, and artists painted not just saints, but ordinary life. The Neapolitans had always seen their city as alive, but now they began to question the divine order that had governed it for centuries. Still, beneath this curiosity ran a deep unease. The people had learned, through generations of conquest, that change often came wrapped in disaster. When Mount Vesuvius erupted again in 1779, the sky turned crimson, and ash blanketed the royal terraces. Even as scholars sketched the eruption, ordinary citizens fell to their knees in terror. The earth reminded them that reason could not silence nature. And then came one of history's most astonishing rediscoveries: the buried cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Excavations began under Bourbon patronage, and soon the world's eyes turned to Naples as ancient frescoes emerged from the ash. Walls that had not seen daylight for 2,000 years revealed their secrets: lovers, gods, feasts, and the ordinary beauty of Roman life. For Naples, it was like holding a mirror to its own soul, beauty and ruin intertwined, both eternal. Visitors from across Europe arrived to witness this resurrection of the past. Artists, writers, and aristocrats, from Goethe to Mozart, walked the narrow Neapolitan streets, captivated by its contradictions. They called it the Kingdom of the Sun, but they also sensed its melancholy. For every palace gleamed a slum, for every opera sung, a prayer whispered in hunger. In the closing years of the 18th century, the winds of revolution began to blow from France. New ideas crossed the Mediterranean faster than ships. Freedom, fraternity, equality, words that thrilled some and terrified others. In Naples, they took on a dangerous glow, for here every idea had to survive not just censorship, but centuries of fear. The city watched, holding its breath, as France burned its monarchy and crowned reason in its place. Naples, that restless kingdom under the moon, could feel the tremor of history approaching, not from beneath the earth this time, but from across the sea. The volcano was silent. The streets hummed with unease. And somewhere in the royal court, beneath the chandeliers and the illusion of peace, someone whispered the word that would soon change everything: revolution. By the final years of the 18th century, Naples had grown uneasy under its silken mask of splendor. The air carried whispers of France, of liberty, of the guillotine's shadow crossing the Alps. The kingdom's ruler, King Ferdinand IV, and his astute wife, Queen Maria Carolina, sensed the tremors long before they arrived. The queen, sister to Marie Antoinette, had seen how quickly crowns could fall when the streets began to shout. The court glittered as brightly as ever, but behind the walls of the royal palaces, fear coiled tight. The queen tightened her alliances with Britain and Austria, determined to keep Naples safe from the infection of revolution. Yet ideas are harder to imprison than men. In the taverns of the Spanish Quarter, in the candlelit studies of scholars, and in the salons of disillusioned nobles, talk of freedom began to spread like wildfire. In 1799, the flame finally caught. The Neapolitan Republic was declared, a fragile, idealistic experiment born in the echo of France's revolution. For a few brief months, Naples became a city of philosophers and dreamers. The tricolor flag waved over the castles, and the people spoke the language of liberty. Streets once filled with beggars were now filled with orators, and the churches echoed not with hymns, but with speeches about equality. But revolutions in Naples have always been as volatile as the mountain above it. The new republic had ideals but no roots. Its leaders, poets, professors, and reformers, lacked the iron will of those they had overthrown. The royalists regrouped, aided by the British Navy and the fierce Sanfedisti armies led by Cardinal Ruffo. When they returned, vengeance came with them. The Parthenopean Republic fell as quickly as it had risen. Those who had dreamed of freedom were dragged to the gallows. The philosopher Eleonora Fonseca Pimentel, who had edited the revolutionary newspaper Il Monitor Napolitano, faced death with calm dignity. Before her execution, she quoted Virgil, "Forcini te haec olim meminus juvabit." Perhaps one day it will be pleasant to remember these things. Her words lingered long after her body was gone, carried through the alleys and into memory. Ferdinand returned to his throne, but Naples was changed forever. The dream of liberty had been buried, yet not forgotten. The king, shaken and humiliated, moved his court temporarily to Sicily, leaving behind a city haunted by ghosts of what could have been. As the new century dawned, Napoleon Bonaparte turned his gaze southward. His armies swept through Italy like a tide, and soon Naples once again felt the weight of a new master. The French general Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother, became king of Naples in 1806, followed by Joachim Murat, Napoleon's flamboyant brother-in-law, a man who rode through the city streets in white plumes and gold braid, adored by some, despised by others. Under French rule, Naples underwent another transformation. Reforms were introduced. Feudal privileges were abolished, roads and schools were built, and a modern legal system took root. For a brief moment, it seemed as if progress had truly arrived. Murat, with his daring charm, dreamed of uniting all of Italy under his crown. He even began to speak of Italia, not as a collection of kingdoms, but as one land, one idea. But dreams are dangerous in Naples. In 1815, Napoleon's empire crumbled, and so did Murat's. Betrayed and abandoned, he tried to reclaim his throne, landing secretly in Calabria. He was captured and executed by firing squad. His last words defiant and proud. The sound of the muskets echoed across the southern hills, a farewell to yet another foreign ruler who had believed he could tame the kingdom that never slept. When Ferdinand returned once more, older and wary, the people greeted him with a mix of resignation and irony. They had seen too many kings, too many flags, too many promises. The bay shimmered under the same moon, the volcano brooded in its silence, and life continued. Vibrant, cynical, beautiful. Naples had become a city of paradox. The poorest of capitals, yet one of the richest in soul. Its fishermen still sang on the shores, its poets still wrote by lamplight, and its streets still pulsed with laughter even after every empire had tried and failed to silence it. The revolutions had passed, the rulers had changed, but something eternal remained. The city was still awake, watching, remembering, waiting. And above it all, Mount Vesuvius stood dark against the night sky. The eternal witness, the old god that had seen kingdoms rise and fall, and knew that, in Naples, nothing ever truly ends. The 19th century opened like a wound that refused to heal. Naples, magnificent yet restless, had survived French kings and Bourbon restorations, but the dream of unity, of Italia, still whispered through its streets. The city was alive with contradictions. The laughter of the poor echoing against the marble facades of the rich, the scent of jasmine and decay mingling in the air, the eternal glow of Mount Vesuvius watching, indifferent, as men fought over ideals. By the 1820s, revolutionary societies, the Carbonari, had begun to spread through southern Italy. They met in cellars behind shuttered windows, swearing oaths of secrecy and freedom. They dreamed of ending foreign rule, of casting off the old order that had kept Italy divided for centuries. Their members were teachers, soldiers, and merchants, ordinary Neapolitans who longed for a nation that existed only in words. The Bourbon rulers, led by King Ferdinand I, feared these secret movements more than foreign armies. He and his successors filled prisons with poets and thinkers, believing that iron could silence ideas. But every cell became a classroom, every exile a spark. The young generation grew restless. They had read about liberty in books, seen its brief flicker in 1799, and now hungered for it again. In 1848, revolutions erupted across Europe, and Naples was swept into the tide. The people filled the squares, demanding a constitution, demanding dignity. For a brief moment, the old order trembled. King Ferdinand II granted reforms, but when the fires cooled, he withdrew them. Cannons roared over the city, and the king earned a new name, Rebomba, the bomb king, for shelling his own people. The dream of freedom seemed crushed once more beneath smoke and sorrow. Yet Naples did not forget. The ideas that had once been whispered now took deeper root. In taverns and workshops, names were spoken with reverence. Mazzini, Garibaldi, Cavour. Italy was awakening, slowly, painfully, and Naples would not be left behind. When Giuseppe Garibaldi landed in Sicily in 1860 with his 1,000 red-shirt volunteers, news raced north like wildfire. His march through the south became legend, a crusade of unity, hope, and danger. As his army approached Naples, panic spread in the royal court. King Francis II, young and uncertain, fled to the fortress of Gaeta. For the first time in centuries, Naples welcomed a conqueror not with fear, but with jubilation. Garibaldi entered the city on horseback, wearing his red shirt and calm smile. The crowds filled every balcony and street, cheering until their voices broke. Bells rang, ships in the harbor fired their salutes, and from the high terraces, people waved flags not of kingdoms, but of a new nation, Italy. Naples had become part of something larger than itself. But unity came with a price. The old kingdom was gone, absorbed into a new state whose power was centered far to the north. The proud capital of the south became a province, its palaces stripped of purpose, its grandeur fading like old gold. The city that had once ruled the Mediterranean was now ruled from Turin, then Rome. For many Neapolitans, unification felt less like liberation and more like exile in their own home. Still, the people adapted as they always had. The 19th century waned with both sorrow and splendor. The music of Enrico Caruso began to echo from the stages of Naples to the concert halls of the world. The Neapolitan song, born of longing and sea wind, carried the city's soul across oceans. Painters and poets turned its poverty into poetry, its ruins into romance. But the shadow of Vesuvius remained. In 1872, tremors shook the region again, a reminder that nature still ruled this land more deeply than any monarch or flag. And in 1884, when a deadly cholera epidemic swept through the city, the beauty of Naples turned ghostly. Thousands died, yet even then the survivors rebuilt, washing the streets, lighting candles in memory, and filling the air once again with the sounds of living. By the turn of the century, Naples stood transformed yet unchanged. Modern trams running beside ancient ruins, royal palaces now serving bureaucrats, fishermen still casting their nets beneath the same restless moon. The kingdom of Naples no longer existed, but its heartbeat lingered in every street, in every song, in every defiant smile of its people. It had become something eternal. Not a kingdom of kings, but a kingdom of spirit. A city that had never truly slept, and never truly surrendered. The waves of the bay whispered against the stone walls as if repeating the city's oldest vow. We are still here. And above it all, the volcano, silent, immense, unknowable, waited, as though keeping the last secret of a kingdom that had burned, rebuilt, and remembered for 1,000 years. When the 20th century dawned over Naples, it came not as a sunrise, but as a dim light struggling through fog. The old kingdom was gone, its royal blood dissolved into the veins of a united Italy. But Naples, proud, unpredictable Naples, still pulsed with its ancient rhythm. The city no longer ruled an empire, yet it remained a world unto itself, standing between sea and volcano, memory and rebirth. The early decades brought both promise and pain. The port grew busier, the factories louder, and the city expanded beyond its medieval walls. Immigrants and merchants from every corner of the Mediterranean mingled in its narrow streets. Naples sang still, its music drifting from open windows, its laughter echoing off stone. But beneath the surface lay the same old tremors. Poverty, corruption, the stubborn endurance of those who had too often been forgotten. During World War II, the city suffered deeply. Bombs rained down upon its harbors and neighborhoods, tearing open both stone and spirit. Families huddled in basements as the sky turned red again, not from lava this time, but from fire. In 1943, when the Germans tried to occupy the city after Italy's armistice, Naples did something it had always done. It rebelled. The people rose in what became known as the 4 Days of Naples, an uprising of ordinary citizens, children, and workers who fought street by street to free their home. When Allied troops finally entered, they found a city bruised but unbowed, waving flags from shattered balconies. The post-war years were hungry ones. Naples rebuilt, but slowly, unevenly. The modern world arrived. Televisions, cars, neon lights, but they glowed against walls still scarred by centuries of struggle. Yet the Neapolitan soul refused despair. Filmmakers like Vittorio De Sica and writers like Elena Ferrante would later capture this strange beauty. The laughter that blooms beside loss, the poetry of survival. Naples, even in poverty, created art that no wealth could imitate. By the late 20th century, the city's story had become one of contrast more vivid than ever. The hills sparkled with lights, the bay shimmered like molten glass, and yet the alleys of the old quarter still told of hardship. Tourists came to see Pompeii's ruins, unaware that the same mountain, Vesuvius, eternal and patient, still breathed quietly over the living city. It had slept for decades, but its silence was never comforting. The Neapolitans had learned to live with its shadow, to love it as they feared it, because it was part of them, as essential as the sea. And then came the modern age, the 21st century, where steel met history and the old songs met electronic beats. Naples entered it not as a relic, but as a survivor. Artists turned its decay into beauty, filmmakers turned its streets into legends, and musicians carried its dialect across continents. The Piazza del Plebiscito, once the stage of kings and revolutions, now echoed with concerts and protests alike. Yet even now, the moon over the Bay of Naples has not changed. It glows upon the same stones, the same restless waters, the same city that refuses to be still. Beneath the hum of scooters and the rhythm of daily life, the echoes of history remain. The footsteps of Aragonese knights, the whispers of poets, the cries of fishermen, the laughter of masked performers, the prayers of those who built and rebuilt this city through every fire and fall. Naples is not just a place. It is a memory that breathes. It is a kingdom that never truly fell because it never truly slept. And if you listen, truly listen, you might still hear the faint murmur of the past mingling with the sea breeze, carrying the voices of forgotten kings, the songs of rebels, the sigh of the volcano. Now, as the lights of modern Naples shimmer beneath the same moon that watched over emperors and beggars alike, let the story rest, not end but rest. The kingdom still breathes, its heart still beating under layers of stone and time. Close your eyes for a moment. Feel the quiet hum of the sea against the harbor stones. Breathe in the salt air, heavy with memory. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another night is falling, and Naples, the city that never slept, dreams once more beneath its ancient moon. The end, but not the silence.